Good morning, everybody. I am so glad that you are joining us. I see that there are some people online as well as people who are joining us here in the sanctuary. I am so glad that you are here today and here to hear the word of God and the light of Christ as we prepare to make room. I want to welcome you, and I'm so glad that you're here to celebrate the first week of Advent with us. It is a time where we prepare and await for the arrival of Jesus. And it is during this time that we prepare our hearts and we prepare our minds for Christ. Before we begin our worship, I want to remind everybody that there are a couple things that are happening in the life of the church. First of all, we are having, during this Advent season, we will be celebrating a gathering of fellowship and cookies on the 19th. Brian, our intern, is helping out with the one committee as we create a time where we can gather our cookies, have fellowship, and the purpose is to pack tins. So what we'd like you to do is bring some tins, and then we will put cookies in the tins and then take it to those individuals who are homebound. So if you happen to have some tins at home that you'd like to donate, that would be wonderful. I also want to remind folks that there is an online ad council meeting today, right after service. And there are definitely some business that we have to attend to, especially as we come to the end of the year and we prepare for our church conference, which will be December 12th. The church conference is a conference in which we do the business of Simpson United Methodist Church. And at that meeting, we decide on leadership and budgets type of issues. So I encourage you to be part of that. That will be December 12th, and it's a Zoom meeting. I also want to remind folks that we are working and worshiping to create worship services in multiple ways. One, here face-to-face, and we have a variety of ways in which we are helping to maintain everybody's protection and safety through a variety of mechanisms. One, we use UV lights to sanitize the sanctuary before people come. And secondly, we do have air purifiers, 2 of them, that filter the air while we're having service in the sanctuary. We also make sure that we have maskings, and when appropriate, we ask folks to just kind of spread out and have that safety distance. So we want you to be comfortable to worship either in person or online. And we're also finding new ways to make sure that you can hear completely the audio online and in our Zoom world. So thank you for your patience as we continue to find ways to worship together. So now let us center our hearts and minds in worship today. The pandemic has led bare and widened the economic disparity locally as well as globally. And as we enter the Advent season, how can our church become a house where the holy will be born anew? And how can our church be a place where we offer comfort and respite and care for individuals? How can our congregation open our doors so that we can offer shelter, we can offer hospitality to others who are facing the onslaught of life and the reality of where we are? No one church can do it all, but each one can do something. And as we study the biblical prophets that call us to care for our neighbors and make room in the inn, the lonely and the frightened to gather together, to care for our neighbors and to make room in the inn. We also find time now where we look and share the light of Christ. We share the light of hope, the light of peace, the light of joy, and the light of love.
Please remain standing for the call to worship. Hope awaits us at Advent. Hope waits for our commitment. In this time of preparation for the work of co-creation, for the birthing of a world that heals the ones in pain. Please be seated. Today begins our Advent journey as we wait for the birth of the one called the light of the world and the hope of the nations. As we light the candle of hope, we give thanks to today's prophets who dare to speak words of hope that form new, unimagined realms and ways of being in relationship with others. Let the light of this candle be a beacon of hope for those who have had doors slammed closed and opportunities squashed. Let this light be a reminder that there is always room at the inn.
Thank you very much. And now let us join together in our affirmation of faith that's printed in your bulletin. Make of my heart a stable, a house for the holy, a warm and sturdy place for hope to live and to grow.
Today's Old Testament reading is from Jeremiah chapter 33, verses 14 through 16, and it is from the Common English Bible version. The time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will fulfill my gracious promise with the people of Israel and Judah. In those days and at that time, I will raise up a righteous branch from David's line, who will do what is just and right in the land. In those days, Judah will be saved, and Jerusalem will live in safety. And this is what he will be called: the Lord is our righteousness.
The Bible doesn't actually mention an innkeeper in the story of the birth of Jesus. But there is a popular notion that lives in our imaginations alone. Sometimes the innkeeper gets this really bad rap, as if he is somebody that is perceived to be a person who slams the door on Mary and Joseph, giving them substandard accommodations to go forth and have Jesus. But what if we saw the innkeeper as somebody who, with a full house, thought literally outside the box? The innkeeper recognized that, yes, I do not have a place here in the inn for this loving family, but here's another opportunity for them. I do have this space in the back, a place where they, as a loving family, can gather together. So let's look at the innkeeper from a different perspective, as a problem solver. What if we endeavored to do the same thing? What if we thought, let's look outside of the box to consider how to resolve a situation in our life? How can we provide ministry of the house of the holy in ways that we have not yet imagined? This Advent season, we will be offering some stories in which we see how other people thought outside of the box. We hear the story that comes from Jane Harris, and she too thought outside the box. What ended up happening to poor Jane is she was in a busy airport in Albuquerque, planning to make her way back home. We have probably all experienced that situation. And as she was traveling, she heard over the announcement that her flight was delayed. Well, again, I'm sure we've all experienced that in the past as well. And so she thought, okay, my flight is delayed, but I will just make the best of it. I will go find a place where I can do some work. And then she hears over the announcement speaker, if there's somebody who speaks Arabic, please come to the front desk. Well, she actually spoke that language. And so she ran to the front desk to see what was happening. The lady, the flight attendant, led her back to her gate where she saw a woman who was collapsed on the ground and just crying out of pain, crying out of fear, crying so hard she was unable to even speak complete sentences. Well, come to find out, she spoke Arabic and was unable to completely understand the message of the flight being delayed. Well, Jane, she happened to be able to speak the same language, so she sat knee to knee with this woman and told her that the flight is not canceled, it's just delayed. And the woman said that she was incredibly grateful because she had to be at her destination because she was having a surgery the next day. And so it was imperative that she be on this flight. Well, here's a woman who could speak the language that she spoke, and she described that her flight wasn't canceled, but rather it was delayed. And in fact, she would get to the airport on time, get to her destination on time, so she could have that surgery. Then what she saw was a miracle. That as people understood what was happening to this individual, they came to comfort her. And she was no longer sobbing on her knees on the ground. The airlines, they brought out apple juice, and people in this crowded area began serving each other apple juice. And then somebody, because it was the holidays, brought out cookies that they were intending to bring to their family members, but instead shared it with the individuals who were now their family and friends in the airport. And as Jane said, she said, I looked around that gate at all of the weary travelers, and I thought, this is the world I want to live in. a shared world. Not a single person in the gate was no longer crying. There was no stress, but everybody worked together to solve the situation. And right there in a busy airport was the light of God being clearly displayed as people shared with one another. People who were once strangers, but now are friends. There are probably many stories like this in your life. And so as we gather together to offer our hearts and our minds to God through our prayers and our gifts and our tithing, may you think of a way in which you can share God's light in a new and different way. Now, spend this time in silent prayer, and I invite you to go light a candle if you wish. Let us join our hearts and minds together as we offer our gifts, our tithes, and our prayers to God. Nobody's going to destroy our town, our area. No one's going to take away the ways in which we live, because after all, the temple is right here, and nobody's going to touch that temple. Well, we of course know in history what happened. The two kingdoms begin to rival. They rival because they want power and control. They want to have power and control over the trade routes. And so as a result, one kingdom, the Babylonians, they end up fighting and destroying Jerusalem, all for power and control. And so the message that you were sharing, the message that this prophet shared, came to life. And here's all these people, like, how could this possibly be? How could our world turn from peace to war so quickly, especially knowing that God's temple is right here where we live? But you see, people didn't like to hear his message. And as a result, he ends up being imprisoned. And so he is writing his letters and writing the different chapters and books in the Bible that shares his understanding of God, even when he is in prison. He's rejected, but yet continues to speak the Lord's message. The faithful who listened to his message and heeded his words, they anticipated what was happening, and they realized that this was a message that many people did not listen to. The worst, though, had not happened. We know it was inevitable and it will happen. Many lives were destroyed, businesses were destroyed, buildings were destroyed, and people were exiled as the Babylonians came and stripped control, stripped identity from all of those who were in Jerusalem. Any reasonable person could see that the city was in doom. And Jerusalem had many different prophets and judgments and tellings of the future. And here he is speaking of hope in the midst of all this doom. How could he possibly see hope? The same proclamations are given to us today. We too are to speak a word of hope and promise in a world often filled with fear and uncertainty, even despair. especially in the season of Advent, we are to share these words of hope so that others can feel it and recognize that there's an other alternative, and that people will simply fall to their knees crying. In the midst of darkness, light is about to break in. In the midst of despair, hope erupts. And after long waiting, we see that there is new life that will happen. The complete fulfillment of God's promise has yet happened, but it is still coming. And such is the Advent faith. That is the purpose of Advent. We know that there is hope, even though we have struggles in our world. That is why we light the candle.